Welcome back to season 6 of the Practical Permaculture Podcast. So, we have been on a break for 2 weeks, and I have recorded a little mini episodes during that time about the house build and the process of selecting our site. So, if you have any questions about that, let me know, and I can give you as much information as I can. And for those of you who also saw our bonus episode that was released earlier this week, we made the announcement that Jo is actually not going to be on the podcast full time anymore. So she's got a new job that is 5 days a week. And between both of our schedules, her workload, and me doing night shift and having the kids pick up and drop off, recordings just become a little bit tricky. We can't make our schedules work. Jo decided so that we can keep the podcast going consistently that she'll have to step back from her role as co-host. So you will still hear from Jo periodically. We will hear what she's up to at her place, but for now she will not be co-hosting the podcast due to life and work commitments. So big farewell to Jo. I know that many people loved listening to her every single week, and she will be missed. This week on the podcast, we have Clancy. His Instagram account is Bees and Blossoms AUS, Australia. So we have him on to talk about all things bees. We talk about what bees need, all the different types of bees, how we can support them, the impact that we're having on bees, all things bees. He has done some big studies at university with projects up in the Northern Territory on country in a knowledge exchange about bees and learning alongside Indigenous people about the effects that are happening up there with climate change. He's got some really interesting things to share. So I hope you enjoy this week's podcast. And just a quick reminder, I would love it if you could subscribe to the podcast. It doesn't cost you anything. It just means that you'll get notifications when episodes are live. And it also helps spread the podcast to more people and suggest it to people when they log on to Spotify or Apple. The more we can spread permaculture learnings and insights around, I think the better. So if you could do that, it would be much appreciated. Welcome to the Practical Permaculture Podcast, your weekly dose of gardening, intentional living, and all things permaculture, served with a side of fun and plenty of great conversations. I'm your host, Alysse, and together we'll dig into practical tips, chat with experts, and explore ways to cultivate a more abundant, sustainable life. Let's get growing. Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. So today I've got Clancy with me joining the podcast to talk about bees.
Yep, I love bees and I can talk about them all day. So keep all the questions coming.
Excellent. So for people who don't know who you are, can you tell me a bit about yourself and your context?
Yeah, so I'm a 24-year-old native bee ecologist living out of Melbourne. I have a tiny little backyard garden, but I still claim it's like a nice little pollinator patch. And I just am set on raising the awareness for all the different insects and pollinators and native bees that we're seeing all around us and the threats that they're facing. Yeah. And then providing all the different tips and things that we can do to help them navigate the threats that they face.
Yeah, wow. And so how did you first get into what you're doing? Like, is it something you've always been interested in, or?
I wasn't always necessarily interested in native bees. I actually only a few years ago, I didn't really know much about native bees at all. But I've always been, nature obsessed kid, like grew up in the country, in the bush, climbing trees, like building cubbies, that sort of thing. Always loved being outdoors and in nature. And recently doing some really cool stuff at uni, like some field work in Northeast Arnhem with the all new people looking at native bees up there. So just sort of falling in love with it recently, and then finding out about how they're facing heaps of threats and like there's lots of declines happening, and it's really going under the radar. Like it's sort of my mission to educate people all about that.
Yeah. Because you do like workshops and talks and all kinds of things, don't you?
Yeah, so I do talks and workshops in like early learning centres, primary schools, high schools, at university clubs,
Yeah.
community groups, volunteer groups, businesses, any one that reaches out, I'll find a way to make a presentation or a workshop happen.
Yeah, so cool. And so I was very naive about bees. I only kind of knew about like the main European honeybee. And we interviewed a guy a while ago who specialized in the TCB, I think they sound like pasta, like Tetragonia carbonara or something. Is that how you say
Yeah,
it?
pretty
Yeah.
close. Yeah, Tetragonula carbonara. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And I was fascinated. And then my kids got a bee book. It's like a lift the flat book. And there's so many things about bees and so many different varieties, some that live underground, some that live, in wood. And it's amazing. So how do you in Australia, I guess, help create habitats and support our bees, or what bees should we be looking at mostly in our own backyards?
Yeah, so there's, like you said, there's different ways that native bees will nest. So some are in wood, some in the ground. And so when we're creating habitat for native bees, we're trying to best simulate the natural environment. So there's bees that will nest in the flower spikes of xanthorrhoeas or grass trees. So they're like carpenter bees and using like woody, like sort of softy wood for bee hotels for carpenter bees and things that nest in that. Then there's bees that nest in reeds, like along riverbanks. And yeah, so creating like hollow bamboo or pithy stems, things like lantana in bundles, or when you do your pruning and coppicing, not throwing out everything to the green waste, maybe keeping some of the cuttings. Then you've got bees that nest in the holes from wood boring grubs and beetles in dead wood and tree stumps. And so you can simulate that by drilling into hardwood with extra long drill bits of different sizes from like 3 to 9 millimeters. There's even bees that nest in like in gum nuts and just any sort of little different crack and crevice. And that's why, getting for the cavity nesting bees, any sort of tunnels that you can get your hands on, and pithy stems, hollow tubes, that sort of thing, and trying to best simulate the natural environment. And then, there's also ground nesting bees too. So there's, just the option of leaving the patches bare in your garden. So just, patches of clay and sandy soils that just don't get covered in a thick layer of mulch or really dense grass or, like a thick layer of pebbles or something. And then you can also make bee hotels for ground nesting bees by making rammed clay earth blocks or filling like terracotta pipes with clay and sand.
Yeah, cool. And so for ones that like nest in hollows, should they be on the ground or in trees? Like where do they like them to be?
Yeah, so the ones that nest in the hollows, I like to, when I make the bundles of pithy stems or drill into the hardwood, I like to hang them up like a little bit off the ground, because sometimes ants or spiders or different things can move in. So if you have it a little bit off the ground, maybe like 1 meter or 2 meters, and hanging from a tree or like a pergola or off a fence where it gets like a little bit of shelter is good. But the main thing with what you want to do when you hang them up is to face them to the northeast, so that they get like that morning sunlight, which is pretty crucial for like being active.
So what else could we be doing in our backyards to help support bees? Because like you hear so much about declining numbers of not just bees, but like all insects. Are there other things that we can do to help encourage them to be in our backyards?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the most important thing, aside from the building the habitat or the bee hotels, is also creating the different, not necessarily nesting habitat, but the resources for native bees. So if you're planting locally indigenous flowering plants, native grasses, shrubs and trees, anything which the native bees can either use for roosting at night or for collecting pollen and nectar from the flowers, is a great thing. And so, I find some of the best families because obviously trying to get a guide for wider Australia, there's lots of different species and genera that occur all across Australia. My favourite families, I would say, that you should be looking for are Myrtaceae. So that's got like all your eucalypts, corymbia, sizigum, Melaleucas, callistemums. That's one of my favorites. Another favorite is Fabiaceae or peas. One of my probably all-time favorites from that is the Hardenbergia, because the leafcutter bees
it's
actually
my favorite.
love the leaves from the soft leaves from Hardenbergia. And then another good family is the Proteaceae. So like Banksias and Grevilleas are awesome. Then what else we got? We got Asteraceae, the daisies. Some of the best ones from them is like the Everlasting, and then there's also some other like sort of really random ones like Wallenbergia is one of my favorites. Bluebells, Gardenia and Scabola, Dianellas are awesome. And then there are some exotics as well, which are really beneficial to things like blue banded bees, like the lavenders and salvias seem to be a really popular one among some native bees, and particularly because they are flowering like even right through the summer as well, can be handy.
Yeah. We've got, I don't know if it's actually called that, like a butterfly bush. That's what I call it. But it's got the long, skinny stems with the little white flowers, and the bees are all over it. So yeah, we've got lots of those around, and the lavender they adore as well. But someone was telling me as well that certain types of bees can't travel very long distances. So I've got a nest, not a nest, like a box, a beehive box that someone's giving me for the native bees. And we haven't brought bees onto the property yet because I'm really nervous that there's not enough, like in a subdivision, and it's all then cleared. And so I'm planting a lot at the moment and trying to get it more established. But I'm worried there's not enough for them for me to have a hive. So like, how much do they actually need, and how close does it have to be for them to be able to access it as well?
Well, this would be species dependent, because like with the hives, that the bees that come from the hives, like the sugar bags, the Tetragonula and the Australplevia, they sort of have to come back to that same hive, because it's like it's set up in a tree or like a hive box that you've got. But we've also got a ton of native species which don't nest in hives. So pretty much every other species apart from the 11 stingless bee species are solitary or semi-social. So they can sort of set up their nest wherever they can find some nice bare patch of soil or a clay bank or a cavity in a dead tree or some pithy stems. So these bees, because they don't need to come back to the hive, they can sort of decide where they want to build a nest, and then have that in closer proximity to a nice aggregation of flowers. And but you do have different ranges in the flight lengths. So you have some bees like the Xylocopas or the carpenter bees. They can fly for kilometers in their navigations. Whereas you have like some small ground nesting species that are like really little that don't travel more than 100 meters or 300 meters from their nest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what they said. Like it had to be within 500 meters. Like they won't go further than that to collect their flowers and food and everything. So we've kind of held off because we want to make sure that if we get them, they're happy there and we can support them. But yeah, so and what about water? Like is water important for the bees as well to have access to?
No, water is only important to European honeybees and potentially the sugar bag bees, because they use the water for like evaporative cooling in their hives. Whereas because so many species are solitary, they get enough of their water intake from the nectar that they drink. And so actually quite often a lot of species of native bees actually get too much water from the nectar, and they exhibit this weird behavior called bubbling, where they like sort of bring back up the nectar that they've drank, and they just have like this bubble of nectar, and then it slowly evaporates the water and becomes like stronger concentrated sugar. And then that they'll drink it. Yeah, so but it's still good to have water sources for the birds and like mud wasps and things that use water when they're making their nests, and different insects and other species, but it's not really something that's important to native bees.
Yeah. And I guess the other part of the equation is as well what you're not doing, like not spraying and not doing these things around your house. So can you talk to that a little bit? Because I think people forget, they have these beautiful elaborate cottage gardens and they want to have all these insects, and then, they might be spraying for spiders or spraying their crops, and how that can really affect bees and insects.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen some incredible declines in the last 30 to 40 years, which coincide with when pesticides, insecticides have become really efficient and persistent in the waterways and in the soils and different things. I'd always recommend against using pesticides and insecticides when we can. One tip that some people are adamant about using them. And one tip that I like to say is if you absolutely have to do some sprays, it's better to do that at night when pollinators aren't visiting the flowers of the things you might potentially be spraying. So that can be one tip. But yeah, I advise against it. And there is some really cool businesses and different things for urging for integrated pest management where you can actually, say you've got aphids, you can buy ladybugs and they'll send you ladybugs to release into your garden who will control the aphids. Or same thing with like scale insects and buying lacewings to control them. So there's ways around that. But I think, the overall best thing you can do is trying to create that balanced ecosystem, because you want the ladybirds and you want the lacewings and you want the wasps, which are going to control the pests that you would normally want to be spraying against. Creating that ecosystem balance in garden is always good. Yeah, another thing that I like to say not to do in the garden is people seem to have a affinity for having the most perfectly tidy and well manicured lawns going overboard on the pruning and clipping, and then throwing the prunings and clippings into the green waste. I'd rather see people have pollinator friendly plants, like maybe replace that lawn with myroporum or a nice native ground cover prostrate sort of wildflowers or shrubby thing instead of the lawn. Instead of throwing the clippings out to the green waste, maybe just keep a little pile somewhere. I like to call them like a bug hub, where you can just keep the clippings somewhere, and that'll be a nice little habitat hideout for different invertebrates and things.
Yeah, I love that idea. So I'm really interested too in your travels up to Arnhem Land. What was that like? And was that just for uni, or was it specifically about bees?
Yeah, so that was a part of my Master of Bioscience. And the research project as a part of that Master of Bioscience was to go up to Arnhem Land because we'd been asked to go up there by the Yolngu people up there who had been noticing the declines in the honey harvest when the different things in the environment that would typically tell them to go and harvest the honey. So when they seen like the stringy barks flowering, that's usually a sign to go and collect the honey. And when they were going to collect the honey, it was not yielding very good results, which is super concerning. So then we'd gone up there to engage in a two-way knowledge exchange. So we would learn everything about the native bees and how they behave and what flowers they like, and what sort of shifts are occurring in the timing of the flowers. And then we were looking at the pollen on the bees through DNA to see what flowers and what plant species the bees were collecting the pollen from.
Yeah, right.
And then looking at those plant species to see if the herbarium records from like 80 years ago suggest that they're flowering different to when they are flowering now.
Yeah. And what did you guys find?
Yeah, we found that there's definitely some shifts in the flowering times of some of the plants that the native bees are relying on up there, like the stringy barks.
Wow. It seems like you, on your Instagram, and I'm like scrolling through, you have quite a strong connection to your local Indigenous people in your area and around Australia. How did you get into that? I think it's something people would find quite fascinating.
Yeah, so the first thing I love to do is just wherever whatever lands that you're living on, at least find out who the traditional owners of the lands are. So when I grew up in Numurkah, which is on the Bangarang country of the Yorta Yorta Nation, the people of the tall trees, and like it's just awesome to find out whatever you can about your local Indigenous nation or language group where you live or work. And same goes with where I live now in Melbourne, on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, the Witchetty Grub people of the Kulin Nations. And I just love to learn about, the different plants and bush foods that were used for foods and for medicines, or finding out how the different calendar seasons of the year. So like we're currently in summer, but summer ends in 2 days because of the day of the year. Whereas in the Indigenous seasons, we're currently in Bitterap, which is the hot and dry weather. Yeah. And so we're going to be in hot and dry weather until it's not going to be hot and dry weather, and different things start flowering, and the length of the days versus the nights becomes similar. And we stop seeing as many butterflies and insects, and we start to see eels swimming up the rivers, and we start to see different things, which, it's not defined by the day of the year, it's defined by what's happening out in our environment. And that's what I really love. And particularly people that are sort of connected with nature and connected with their gardens, they will be noticing, when different insects are appearing, or like when things are flowering. And that's like one of the things that Indigenous people are really strong at and good with, and being connected to nature and connected to the country. Because one thing I love was an Indigenous person said to me that country is like the classroom. So country is the teacher, and being out on country is like the classroom. So when you're in your garden, you're learning, you're in the classroom, and country is the teacher.
Yeah. I used to work in early childhood, and we used to have a saying that your environment is the third teacher. So, you've got the child as the teacher, the individual, the teacher, like the person teaching, and then the environment. I think it's so important to remember that, like that our environment teaches us so much if you're willing to stop and observe and look and interact with it, for sure. Because we've moved here, it's a new climate for me. We've only been here a year. And so one of the first things I did when we landed here was to look at the Indigenous calendar. And it was really interesting, like you said, like when the goannas are doing this is what it means, and the change of the season. And there's so many biological markers that we're just so unaware of until you actually start looking and paying attention. And, when the mullet run or when the whales are coming, it all means different things. And these slight changes in the environment. It was probably about a week ago where our mornings started getting quite cool, and, you're reaching for the doona. And so it's like, what does that mean? And what does that tell us? And what's coming next? And I think it's a fabulous way to start interacting with your local community. Did you reach out to any organization or people in particular to start making those connections?
Well, there's different things you can do. There's Aboriginal corporations that have websites. And some have the information which is open to all, because there's levels of knowledge in Indigenous thinking systems. There's levels of like how sacred some of the knowledge is versus how different things are open to all people to know. And so looking at things online for those public, like blog posts and videos and things online. Then also, Instagram accounts and different things like following ranger groups. And then there's even like really involved things like Indigenous guided tours, like the Royal Botanic Gardens at Melbourne have one. And I just did that the other day and got like some local knowledge on some of the plants and some of the history of the Botanic Gardens and Melbourne from Indigenous cultural tour guides. Just finding different ways like that where you can get connected to your surroundings, and the Indigenous knowledge is something I really encourage.
Yeah, it was really cool. We go to a bush kindy once a week with my kids, and the facilitator, Steve, he's not Indigenous, but he's very well connected in the Indigenous community. And he got really emotional because he was telling one of them where we were sitting. So there's this big old Banksia tree. We call her Grandmother Banksia, and we all sit underneath it. And that's kind of where our little circle takes place and whatnot. And people knew that he did bush kindy, but he spoke to this lady in particular, and he was saying, oh, we do bush kindy out by the beach here and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, where exactly is it? And he told her, and she said, oh, that tree is actually very significant. And Steve was saying, like, I felt this connection to the place and I knew it was special. But then when she started telling me about it and their traditions around this particular area, he got really emotional telling us about it. And it was really special, knowing that we were continuing some of those traditions unknowingly and having that same connection to place. So it was really special. And I think when you start making those little threads and connections, it just gives more meaning and diversity to our culture and our community.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's you hear so many stories of that, about that, how those special connections to nature and your surroundings that you might not even be knowing that they're happening, but they do.
And so you've been obviously out in nature a lot because of your studies and your passion for bees. What's something that you think that nature's taught you?
Something nature's taught me is just how being amongst nature and how positive the benefits are for your health and for your mental health and your well-being and just everything that's all interrelated. Like, obviously there seems to be a funny trend with sort of people my age and like having a big night and getting on the piss, and then the next day they say, oh yeah, I need to like reconnect with nature after they've like all their sins from the night before or whatever. And I feel like that there is definitely some truth to that. Like, it is to like reset your mind and your body and your soul by just being in nature, like sitting under that gum tree, like feeling the grass under your feet. Like there is something really special that I love with nature, and something that it's taught me.
Yeah, I have an affinity with the ocean. Like, that's my number one. And I was in such a bad mood the other day. I got off night shift. I was so tired. The kids were like, just under my skin because I was in a bad mood. We went to the beach. My husband's like, just go for a swim. Please just get in the water. And I did. And I was like, it's just magic. Like, it just makes you feel so much better. And it's like, washes everything away. 20 minutes in the ocean. I think that's actually the statistic. It has to be like your bare skin for 20 minutes on either soil or grass or in water. And there's something about water in particular, like the energy flow in it, that has this property. But it's amazing that nature can have such a profound effect on people and so quickly, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's even been studies into the effect on your not only mental health but like your productivity at work, and comparing office spaces that are looking out at concrete jungle views versus like a green roof or like a nearby park, and finding that when people are just looking out the window at something green, some nature, it increases their productivity and just all the different benefits of mental health, just like in a workspace, and proves and tried and tested in science.
Yeah. Well, even here in our house, so we've just moved into a tiny home, so there's not a lot of room for plants because our stuff's just everywhere at the moment. And our house that we used to have was filled with indoor plants. And I noticed a big difference, but I didn't think my husband would. And when we were here for a couple of months, he's like, I really miss our indoor plants. Like, I know I whinge about them all the time, that they're in the way. He's like, but I actually really miss our plants. He's like, I can't wait to get all our plants back. Because he's not a very woo-woo kind of person. But yeah, even he was like, I really am looking forward to having our plants back in the house. So it makes such a big difference.
I relate to it for sure.
Yeah. And so do you have a favorite bee then? Like, you've been studying them for a while. Is there a particular bee that has like some quirk or that you kind of particularly connected to?
So they're part of this genus of native bees, which like the name suggests, cloak and dagger. They're stabbing someone in the back, or cuckoo bees, if you've heard of the cuckoo birds that push the eggs out of the nests of the other birds. So cuckoo bees, what they do is they will wait for the blue-banded bee to go off and forage for more pollen to feed its baby, and they'll sneak into the blue-banded bee's nest, and they'll lay an egg inside the blue banded bee's nest and then sneak back out. Blue banded bee keeps continuing to collect pollen, seals off the nest.
Yeah.
And then that egg from the blue banded bee will hatch second. So the cuckoo bee's egg will hatch first and eat all of the pollen while it's in the larval stage, and then it'll become the baby bee, and the blue banded bee baby will not make it.
Wow.
So it's like this really it's called kleptoparasitism. So they're stealing resources, they're stealing pollen.
Sneaky. We've just started seeing blue banded bees on our property, which is really cool because, like I said, everything's been cleared. So we're trying to make our little nature corridor, because a lot of people are just building project homes and lawns, just grass like everywhere. So we're doing a lot of, like what you said, leaving a lot of our logs from many of the trees that fall like in the garden intentionally. But the bare space thing was a good tip. I never actually thought about that, because we are mulching a lot and covering a lot of surfaces. So that's really good to think about and know to like try and leave some bare space around for them as well.
Yeah, and one thing that breaks my heart is when people say, oh, I haven't had like any blue banded bees this year, I haven't had blue banded bees the last couple of years. And I go, oh, did you mulch all over your gardens? They go, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, because you think you're doing the right thing. You know, you think you're like, oh, yeah, I'll keep the soil in and it's good for the plants. And yeah, so yeah, definitely something to think about. Are there particular flowers the blue banded bees like? Because I love them in our garden.
Yeah, the blue banded bees, because they're a species of long-tongued bees. So there's bees that are short-tongued, and there's bees that are long-tongued. So long-tongued bees include the family of Apidae, which has the honeybees and bumblebees and blue banded bees. Yeah. And so blue banded bees are able to access the nectar and pollen resources into the backs of like longer tubular flowers. Okay. So that means that they can access gardenias and salvias and lavenders and just any sort of thing. What's another one, like Westringia? Anything that has like a long tubular flower, and they have the long enough tongue to access all the good stuff. Cool. And so and the other thing that seems to be a trend related to blue banded bees is flowers that are blue and purple seem to be also really popular amongst that.
Yeah, cool. I actually saw on Instagram this morning, I don't know if it was true or not, see things floating around, but it was like photos of how bees see flowers and like the pollen on them. And I thought that was really interesting too. And trying to think about your garden and your plantings and just the habitat you can create from that perspective, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and an interesting thing with their eyesight is that they actually have the ability to see on the color spectrum that humans can see, the electromagnetic frequency range. Humans can see from red to purple or violet, and so that's like visible light to humans. And so obviously if you've got before red, that's infrared. So if you see those security cameras and things that can see at night, and then you've got the other side of purple or other side of violet is ultraviolet. And so humans can't see past purple, whereas native bees actually have the ability to see ultraviolet colors. So if you've ever seen the ultraviolet lights, which make it easier for humans to like pick up the radio frequency signals with our eyesight, but that's how bees just normally see with their eyes. So different flowers. So say you might look at a flower and it's yellow, but on the ultraviolet color spectrum, that might appear to have like a little target of ultraviolet light reflection.
Yeah, that's what these photos looks like.
Yeah. So some flowers can maybe look yellow to us, but they might have like a target which sort of indicates, a better pollen signal for the bees to look at a flower and go, yep, I want to visit that one for its pollen.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
And just that they're so different. Like you said, some are solitary, some are in groups, some have big tongues, some have little tongues. Like their needs are so diverse. So they're amazing to learn about. And I'm sure you'll be like learning about bees for the rest of your life and still not know everything about them.
But Absolutely. I just visited a bee guru expert at the Melbourne Museum, Ken Walker.
Yeah.
And he spent like a large part of his life looking at Lassia glossum bees, which is a few genera and subgenera of a single family of native bees. And he's like an absolute genius, spent like decades of his life on native bees.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you can imagine just how, and I'm not even sure if I've said on this podcast yet, but there's over 2,000 species of native bees. Like, it's
just
incredible.
Native bees.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we don't even actually know the exact number, like, because we're finding more. So the exact number is somewhere around 1,650. But we know that there's more out there if we had a really good look and went and found them all.
That's crazy, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today about bees and about how we can support them, because I think it's something we should all be really conscious of and start thinking about now coming into, you know, like winter and then planting for spring, because people kind of go in spring, oh, I want to support it. But I think all that prep work's done beforehand as well. So it's kind of good to have these chats when we're planning our gardens rather than when you're already kind of at that stage of everything flowering.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah.
And if any listeners have any bee related questions, you can just hit me up on Instagram on the Bees and Blossoms. And just find me. We can chat bees, or if people want to talk to you about anything after this episode, and you can forward it my way. Like, I'll be happy to answer any more questions, or if people want to also get me in to run workshops or presentations at their school, nearby schools or community groups or anything, I'm open to that as well.
Amazing. I'll put all your details in the show notes and how to get in contact with you. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.